Knowledge is a burden. And that's why sometimes it can be miserable living in this world with all you dumb bitches. What's good? Welcome, everybody, Unukedu, and welcome back to another episode of the Toby Talk here on the Toby Network. It's been a while. It's been such a while. Okay, I've been on hiatus, but I'm back for now. We'll see how it goes for the rest of this Mercury retrograde. But I'm back for now, okay? So enjoy this beautiful face and these wise words while you can. Here at the Toby Talk, basically, I'm talking about my insight, my life, things that I've learned, okay? It's a little bit different from the Spiritual Digest because the Spiritual Digest is more on the spiritual woo. But I am the siren, the mermaid, the witch, your favorite hot boy spiritualist. So there's gonna be some spiritual woo woo within the Toby Talk regardless because I just can't separate it from me. I'm literally not human. But, the Toby Talk is more on the mundane. All right, so yeah. And even today's episode, even though we're gonna be talking about the concept of knowledge being a burden, we're still gonna tap into some woo woo waters because how could I not? How could I not? So just sit back and relax and listen and allow what I say to give you some perspective. Okay? So I've been coming into a time in my life where I'm understanding more for myself, but also I'm understanding it in relational terms, like by seeing other people and their life journeys and stuff like that. So I'm observing, but I'm also conceptualizing from a very internal space at the same time. But all that to say is that I'm in a period of my life where I'm really coming to the realization that knowledge is actually a burden. And I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people here that are like, yes, we've been new, especially a lot of nihilistic people, which that'll be another conversation for another day on the Spiritual Digest because whoa. But I want y'all to see knowledge as a burden, but put like a star by it. So star knowledge is a burden because it is, but knowledge is also power, as we know. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory, pretty simple, but we're gonna talk about that today. And I'm in a period right now where I'm entering into my Saturn return. Okay. So for all my astro girlies, boilies, and dailies, all my astro people, y'all know I'm in my Saturn return. That's probably why I'm back here on YouTube. But I'm in my Saturn return right now. And I've lately been taking stock of everything that I've learned, everything that I've gone through, everything that I've experienced, and that I'm currently experiencing now. Because I'm not someone who, I waited until my Saturn return to start doing the work. No, I've been doing the work for years, intentionally being like, okay, come my Saturn return. And the Saturn return's definitely been returning. But, you know, I'm not new to this work and having to do the patience and do the things. I'm not new to that. Check out my episode on Do the Things, my spiritual digest. But, anyways, all that being said, with this context of me being in my Saturn return and having to do the work throughout my life, part of doing the work, doing the things for me has been learning, knowledge of self, knowledge of my surroundings, knowledge of my lineage, of my ancestry, of my history, knowledge of history in general, culture, spirituality, anthropology, politics. It's been a lot of knowledge work. A lot. It's been a lot of unlearning, learning, and relearning. And I'm a good student, straight A student, 4.0 GPA, summa cum laude, university. So best believe I always have my thinking cap on. And as part of my knowledge work, I've also been privileged with the opportunity to teach people what I know through various avenues. Some of it's via my podcast, which if you don't follow, go and follow the Poppy Watches Grotto podcast, streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Google Pods, basically most, if not everywhere you get your podcasts. Stream it. Season 2 coming very soon. Okay. So some of it's been through my podcast, some of it's been through my Patreon, which is the podcast on crack. So if you're not subscribed to the Poppy Watches Grotto Patreon, subscribe. Because it helps me, of course, make YouTube videos, but it also helps me do other things like the podcast and stuff like that. So definitely subscribe to the Poppy Watches Grotto Patreon. But in addition to the podcast and the Patreon, I've also been privileged with just being able to teach people through life, whether that's through TikTok videos or in like community spaces, or just teaching people who are younger than me or peers, so friend groups and stuff. I've even had the privilege of teaching people who are older than me, and sometimes I look at it as a privilege, sometimes I don't, because it usually comes with a battle. And it's not usually something that I myself would want to do, but I've just been thrust in that position. All that to say that as part of my learning journey, I've also had to teach. And because I've had to serve as both a student and a teacher multiple times in multiple different scenarios, situations, and contexts, I've come to really realize and understand that knowledge is a burden. It's a burden in the sense that once you know something, you can't unknow something. And that's not just in the sense of like, oh, I know history. History is beautiful, but we know history has an ugly past, especially if we're looking at it in terms of marginalization, African people across the globe, and other marginalized groups. Once you know something, you can't unknow it. So it goes for history, but it also goes deeper than that. Once you know the truth about something, about yourself, about someone else, about a situation, you can't unknow that truth. For university, I went to a Catholic university. I was born and raised Catholic. Very devout. I've always been very spiritual, but I was very devout. As part of my Catholic university, I had to take theology courses. And at the time, I was like, okay, yeah, makes sense. I'm in a Catholic university. Let me take theology courses. But also, I'm a super Catholic. I'm going to be canonized as a saint one day. So, of course, I'm going to take theology classes because I just love my religion. Right? Little did I know that there's a running joke among the theology sector that if you want to become an atheist or no longer part of that religion, you study theology. Woo. Didn't make me an atheist. No, I'm still very much a spiritual person. It's just no longer through Catholicism. It's through my traditional ancestral practices. Okay, the woo woo is still very much true. It's still very much true over here. It's just not so much angels and saints and more so ancestors and spirits of nature. But what I'm saying with that is once I took theology classes and I learned the actual history of Christianity, which some of it I knew because I'm a history buff and I love studying history. But once I knew it in the nitty gritty, and I was like, oh, oh, you can't unknow it. You can't unknow it. Like you can't. You can't. And you're like, okay, this doesn't make sense, and oh, this up. So that was originally a pagan practice from there. That was originally a pagan god from there, and then it became, oh, what are we doing? This whole thing sounds sacrilegious, actually. Fuck. Maybe, maybe this isn't for me. You can't unknow something like that. I'm just giving that as an example. And again, you can apply this to so many different situations. Like right now, we're in the day and age where there's a lot of files on the internet making buzzes, buzzing, speaking in code here, but a lot of files. And Once you know what's in those files, you can't unknow it, right? So all of these things point to the very true nature that knowledge is a burden. It is. Hell, once you study critical race theory and critical social justice theory, which I have, and it's something I'm continuously doing, you can unknow nothing. Like, once I realized that the way we market food is inherently sexist, I was like, wait, for somebody else, you would be like, okay, this is way too woke. This is too deep. Like, you are doing too much. But once you actually study it, you're like, oh no, we're not doing too much. We're not doing enough. Like, why is yogurt and things like that specifically marketed towards women in the coloring, in the messaging, even in commercials, yet things like beers and burgers are specifically marketed towards men? And when women are in commercials like that are more catered towards beers and alcohol, stuff like that, they're usually sexualized for the male gaze. But if we were to market men in commercials for like yogurts and salads, they would be feminized or seen to be gay or queer. Like, I hope you guys are seeing piecing this together. Like, there really isn't any biological difference between the hair on a male's body, like on our head, versus a female's. But why do we have men's shampoo and female shampoo? And why is the female shampoo, the women's shampoo, right, more expensive? But the male's shampoo is usually cheaper. Is it like I'm not trying to diverge into too many places here, but I'm just using that as examples for you guys to understand and be like, oh, like once it's always that deep. And because it's always that deep, knowledge is a burden. Knowledge is a burden. It is. It takes me back to that one thing where it's like, would you rather be the smartest person in a world full of stupid people, or would you rather be a stupid person in a world full of smart people? And once you know things, once you actually take the time to study things and to look at things from all different aspects, because academic knowledge is not the only type of knowledge. And I feel like in Western societies, we value academic knowledge the highest when it's not. Emotional intelligence is a thing, spiritual intelligence and knowledge are things, cultural intelligence and knowledge. Like, there's so many different knowledges and intelligences that matter and that intersect, because nothing is ever just one or the other. Everything intersects, right? So once you really have those knowledges and stuff, it can really feel like you are a smart person in a world full of dumb ass bitches. And if you look at our legislature, at least here in the United States, and our government, it's not too far off at all. It's not too far off at all. And God, goddamn. But all that to say that knowledge is a burden. It is. Because once you know something, you cannot unknow something. Once you know better, you do better. Now you can choose not to, but there will still be that nagging in the back of your head that's like, no, we know better. Right? It's an energy, it's a spirit. Now we're getting into some woo-woo shit, right? It's a spirit, consciousness. Consciousness exists. And consciousness exists in everything. And once you know something, you cannot, I know, you can try to force yourself, or maybe something can happen. I don't know. Maybe they can brainwash you, hell, things happen. Things exist. But it is a burden because it shapes the way you look at the world. There's a reason why we have the saying, ignorance is bliss. And as a teacher, I often find I get students, especially younger folk, that always want to know something. And we're going to talk about spiritually, right? Because that's mainly what I teach people through my platform: spiritual knowledge and wisdom, indigenous African knowledge and wisdom, which science, modern day Western science, is just now catching up to. Y'all just now figuring out that plants can communicate to each other. But when we told y'all plants were alive and could talk, y'all thought we were demonic and stupid. Y'all thought we were monkeys. Okay. But now y'all just discovered the mycelium network. Who's the stupid monkey now? Anyways, that was a little aside. Back to what I was saying. I often teach spiritual wisdom from an indigenous Igbo African lens. And I find a lot of younger people always want to know something. They always want to know this and that and the third and da. And I appreciate the optimism. I appreciate the eagerness. But one thing that I always try to communicate with them that they never listen to is that you have to pace yourself. Some things are not meant for you to know right now. Some things are not meant for you to know at all. And I guess I've never really gotten to a point where I've been able to articulate the language to them exactly why. So perhaps this video is going to serve as that, but the reason is because knowledge is a burden. When you understand how things really work, you can never look at them the same way. And the fact of the matter is that nothing is ever black and white. Everything is in infinite shades of gray. Nothing is ever positive or negative. It is always a mixture. Nothing is ever good or bad. Good and evil are always in conversation with each other. That's why they say you got to take the good with the bad, because they are always coming together. Everything is always nuanced. Always nuanced. It's always a spectrum. That is why when looking purely at mundane things, mundane issues in society, like racism, white supremacy, anti-blackness, capitalism, misogyny, patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, etc., there's never a clear-cut solution on what to do. Well, there are always solutions, obvious solutions, but we don't want to be doing them. But when we're looking at how these things interplay in lives, it's always nuanced because everything is nuanced. Everything is nuanced. Everything is so complex. Intersectionality exists. And once you know something like that, you can't go back to having that black and white thinking that must be this or that type thinking, because that's just not how nature works. That's just not how the universe and world and people and societies and cultures and governments and histories work. And because everything's complex, it can be very much burdensome to wrestle with those complexities, to wrestle with those conflicting truths, because multiple things are always true at the same time. People often say, two things can be true at once. It's not that two things can be true at once. It's that multiple things are always true at once. And those truths are always in conversation with each other. They're always in conversation with each other, which can make finding resolutions difficult, but not impossible, because in order to find a resolution, you have to know that multiple truths are always in conversation with each other, and that the resolution is going to have to be multilateral to compensate that, to rectify that, to resolve that. Because just because multiple things are always true at once, some truths will have more weight than the others, because that's how life is. But it takes a certain level of discipline, of empathy, but also neutrality and diligence to hold multiple things together like that, especially if the truths are conflicting, and to find the most sound solution, the solution that will provide the least amount of resistance and provide the best amount of positive and healing impact. That's a burden. But you can only get there with knowledge. I hope this is making sense for you all. But on the flip side, it also takes an extremely powerful person to do something like that. And that is why knowledge is power. And thus, if knowledge is a burden, but knowledge is also power, power is burdensome. It is. That's why Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great responsibility. Y'all see how it's all connecting? Okay, I also got comic book intelligence too. That's an intelligence as well. So many intelligences exist out here. Don't get it twisted. So many different knowledge systems in this grand universe that y'all need to tap into, bitch. Y'all being willfully stupid because y'all don't want to tap into the knowledge that you already have, because y'all don't want to tap into knowledge that's already available to you. You being willfully stupid, bitch, and that's why you're miserable. Because stupidity also has miserable, can make you miserable. But ignorance can also be bliss. But in this day and age, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. Tomato, tomato, potato, potato. It's all about perspective at the end of the day. But knowledge is inherently dualistic. With knowledge, you can make your life and the lives of others easier, better, healthier, more prosperous, wealthier in all ways, including financially wealthy, right? But knowledge requires upkeep. Knowledge requires study. Knowledge requires unearthing. It requires remembrance. It requires facing things. It requires holding a burden. It requires labor. Whether you decide to use that knowledge for positive or negative, it requires labor. And it requires you to face the truth. All that can be and is burdensome to a certain extent. But knowledge is liberating. And despite what all these modern day revolutionaries and TikTok activists want to believe and think, liberation is burdensome. Liberation requires labor. It is a burden to liberate yourself, to be a revolutionary. It requires you to wake up, to fight for your right. That's labor. That's a burden. Who wants to get up and fight? Oh my God. And this conceptualization of knowledge being a burden is not new. It's ancient. Okay, because even in the Bible, it said that Adamus and Evelonia were condemned because they ate from the knowledge, the fruit that contained the knowledge of good and evil. Can the church say amen? Y'all remember what happened to Evelonia and her nigga Adamus? Y'all know what happened. But in that mythological story, right, it says that, they ate from the fruit that contained the knowledge of good and evil. And because of that, they were no longer in bliss in the Garden of Eden and they were cast out. We can take that story and break it down to be like, okay, what is it psychologically saying? What is it saying about knowledge? I have an even better mythological story for y'all. And it's one that resonates more for me because it comes from my people, the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria, right? And that is the story of Agu. So, for those of y'all who do not know, Agu is the Agbara of wisdom. Agbara is basically deity, a god, goddess, right? Means power. It's a power source, so a deity. In Odinani, Agu is the Agbara or deity of wisdom, divination, knowledge, intellect, consciousness, mysticism, healing, medicine. Agu was very connected to Dibia, which are spiritual doctors. And there's a story about Agu that exists, and it says that when Chineke, so the supreme being, God slash the universe, the one source, when Chineke created the Agbara, that there was one named Agu who was particularly more curious than the other Agbara. And Agu wondered, why is it that Chineke knows everything? And Agu wanted to know what Chineke knew. So Chineke said, okay, Agu, if you want to know what I know, you must balance all of the other Agbara on your head. So Agu said, bet, and decided to balance all the other Agbara on their head. And I'm using there because Agu is known to be two-headed, one being male, one being female. So Agu is by gender. Ow. Ow. Anyways, so Agu crafted a plan and was able to balance all the other Agbara on their head. And because of that, they were gifted consciousness of Chineke. They were gifted the ability to know all that Chineke knows. And Agu became the guardian, steward, and custodian of universal consciousness. There are even some mythological stories as well that said that afterwards, Chineke now said, okay, Agu, now you must not allow the other Agbara to take pieces of you and eat, consume, so that they could have portions of consciousness and wisdom within themselves. And it said that they did, and that because of that, everything has its own intelligence and wisdom and consciousness. Now, that's another mythological story that is saying a lot of different things. It does highlight on how knowledge is power, but it does also highlight on how knowledge is burdensome. Because how are you going to balance all this other shit on your head? How are you going to balance all the other deities on your head? And then in some of the other stories afterwards, now you allow them to eat portions of you so that they have the gift that you have just on a minor scale. So that they can now have their own wisdom. Because all of that wisdom together makes up universal wisdom in the collective consciousness. There's even another Igbo saying, an Igbo ilu, which means proverb in English, an Igbo ilu that says that a child must witness an abomination in order to know that it exists. There's a lot that's being said in that proverb, but also with the tale, the mythological story of Agu. And one thing about Agu is that Agu is very dualistic, not just in gender. Agu rules over consciousness and healing, but also over madness and mental insanity. Pointing that sometimes if you know too much, you can go crazy. You might go crazy by knowing too much. Okay. Okay, bitch. But I wanted to give you all that mythological story in particular to illustrate some points, but also to get you all thinking. Because again, there's a lot being said, and I'm not going to go into a whole deep dive into it. That's for you all to unearth. So I'd be very interested in hearing y'all's thoughts and what you come up with in the comments. But it does highlight that thing of knowledge having some sort of burdensome aspect to it. But even within that burdensome aspect, there's great and deep power. So really reflect on that. And I'm now going to take this all the way back to conversation when I was talking about with my students. Oftentimes with the students I encounter, especially the younger ones, you know, they want to know things so quick. Because again, we're in the age of information. Knowledge is at the fingertip, which is crazy that knowledge is so easily accessible, yet so many people are still wildly, vastly undereducated, uneducated, ignorant, and plain out stupid. But that's another conversation for another day, right? But when it comes to the spiritual knowledge, because that's what I teach, they want it like that. And I tell them, hey, you're young. It's okay. Allow it to come. Yes, be consistent. Do this, but you don't need to know everything at the moment. Some of them will get upset. Others will be like, no, I'm okay, and try to make it seem like they're so much different and so much more mature. And so I give. With discernment, of course, but I give. And then they get to a point where they've learned so much spiritually, so much about themselves, about their purpose, about their duty, about the world, seen through the illusions and the delusions, and seeing the nitty gritty and the truth of things, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly. And then they get to the point where they just retreat. Maybe they crash out a little bit, or they dive into a little bit of depression, which is normal. They become overwhelmed, so they pull back from their traditions, they isolate, they do all these things. They leave the communities that they were part of or that they even tried to set up for themselves. And I'm not saying that there's anything inherently bad in those things, because isolation is part of the process of knowledge acquisition, and it is part of the spiritual journey. Alright, even Igbo people understand that in order to gain some knowledge, you do have to dig deep within yourself, which will require you being in the dark at times. But I find that a lot of these students, they go through certain things that they don't necessarily have to, and sometimes it leads to self-sabotage. And then after a period of time, they come back. And they're like, oh, I'm back. You were right. I had to let go of all this stuff, and it was too much. I burnt myself out, but now I'm back, and I'm doing it on a different term, and I'm ready to learn again. And I'm like, And they're like, you're right. And I'm like, yeah, I know I was right. I've lived this life as well. And like I said, I don't think at the time when I was teaching them I had the knowledge to communicate it that I have now, where I can say, hey, you need to understand that knowledge is burdensome. Knowledge can and will save your life and the lives of others. Knowledge will free you. It will free us all. It is needed, but it does come with weight, responsibility, accountability, and burden. And we have to stretch our capacities and make sure our capacity fits the knowledge we are seeking. And that's of any type. And sometimes we have to make peace with, now is not the time for us to know something. And sometimes we have to make peace with, sometimes we're never meant to know something. Especially when it comes to the spiritual stuff, because a lot of y'all is trying to get knowledge in practices that you have no claims to, that are not indigenous to you, and that you don't have the mantle to even initiate into. Looking at spiritual practices, for example, spiritual knowledge, a lot of things are still very much hidden and gatekept for various reasons, but there's still so much that's accessible to us. But even then, so much of what's still accessible to us was not necessarily accessible to our ancestors that practiced this thing, because a lot of this knowledge, the nitty gritty, nuanced, intricate stuff, a lot of it was reserved for certain people that had certain mantles, that had the capacities to hold that knowledge and disseminate it for other people. That's another thing we have to understand. But hey, we're in a new day and age. and things are changing. And fortunately slash unfortunately, all of us have to stretch our capacities at some point if we want to make it through. And that's with everything. All right, we all need to learn how to count to 1,000. We all need to know how to do addition, multiplication, subtraction, division, PEMDAS. Okay? Now, I don't know if we all need to know the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, but we all need to know, we all need to know something a bit advanced. But we all are not meant to be mathematicians. And we all don't need to memorize the first 40 digits of pi. I hope this is making sense for you all. So these are things that I want you all to sit with. I want you all to think about because it's important. And again, I gave different examples, some of them spiritual, but this applies to everything because knowledge and intelligence is everywhere. And they all intersect. So meditate on that and sit with that. And if you didn't get anything from this video, fuck you. And I'm not joking. Fuck you, bitch. But the TLDR version, just to sum it up, is that knowledge is power and knowledge is a burden. Because knowledge is dualistic and requires you to sift through and identify the nuances that exist. Because multiple things are always true at once and are always having conversation with each other at once. Knowledge requires us to stretch our capacity to hold that multidimensionality and often those contradictions at once so that we can see through to the point and see the bigger picture that's being constructed. And that's what needs to be understood about knowledge if we are going to use it in ways to enhance not only our lives, but the lives of others in society. If we are going to utilize knowledge morally, ethically, intentionally, and responsibly, that must be understood. And it's something that we're all going to have to wrestle with because it's going to manifest in different ways for different people because we all live different lives and we all have our own natural intelligences and knowledges in different contexts that we're existing in and coming from and going towards. But the truth of the matter is, knowledge is dualistic. It is complex. It is power, but it is a burden. Goodbye, y'all. Catch you fall.